Hi, and welcome to Indivisible St. Peter Greater Mankato's Nicollet County Commissioner primary candidate meet and greet for the August 9th primary. We're here with candidate Jennifer Andrashko, who is going to introduce herself for a little bit. We will ask her some questions that were given in advance in the form of a written questionnaire, and perhaps ask some follow-up questions, and then we'll open the floor for questions from attendees. So we've got about 25 minutes total. So Jennifer, why don't you take it away? Introduce yourself and why you're running.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jennifer Andrashko, and I'm proud to be running for Nicollet County Commissioner in District 1. A little bit about me. I live on the north side of St. Peter with my two little girls, a couple blocks from the sweet community outdoor pool. And I've lived in South Central Minnesota for 13 years. I did the math yesterday as I was thinking about this. And 8 of those was spent in Le Sueur. And then I've been here in St. Peter for 5 years. I was born in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where I lived until middle school when I moved 15-ish miles west of Eau Claire to a rural farming community, Elk Mound, Wisconsin. And I graduated from Elk Mound High School. I think I was trying to remember, I think when I moved there, the population sign was not quite at 500 residents, so a pretty small community. So I am a transplant, both to Minnesota and here in St. Peter. But I don't know, I like to think there's something pretty wonderful about the act of making a choice to have a life somewhere and make a home somewhere, and I've done that. Professionally, I'm a practicing social worker, so I've been licensed here in the state of Minnesota since, 2009. And I've worked in social services more than 20 years. I started working in social services actually as an undergraduate student. So I was studying French, but working 20 to 30 hours a week as a case manager in a shelter for families experiencing homelessness. So when I graduated, I had this academic background in modern languages, but this sort of wealth of real world social work experience with real families in the community. I spent some time living in southern France, where I worked for the French education system after I graduated from college, and primarily in communities serving Muslim immigrant families. And outside of that, I have professional social work experience in a number of settings with a number of populations. I'll just name a couple. I've worked with incarcerated parents in the county jail. I have worked doing parent coaching for parents who are engaged or involved with the child welfare system. And I have developed and staffed and worked in an integrated behavioral health care team in a primary care clinic serving the uninsured. Most recently, however, I have worked as an educator preparing future social workers. So in a couple months, I will start my 9th year at Minnesota State University, Mankato, where I am a tenured associate professor of social work. I guess kind of wrapping up, as an educator, I spend a lot of time talking with students about one of the ethical principles that we hold in social work, and that is how important it is that we allow for and honor the self-determination of others when we do our work with clients and client systems. So what this really means is that it would be unethical from our code of ethics and from my own personal value system for me to assume that my own needs and priorities are representative of any other individuals. And I wanted to touch on this in my opening remarks because I think it's critical to the role of a leader, no matter where you are working. And if elected, I would be comfortable with and prepared to engage with my constituency and to look to you as critical informants for those of you who are constituents in this call. As critical informants, while we're making really important decisions. So I guess in short, I'm not paralyzed by challenging conversations or decisions. I fully expect there might be, competing needs and priorities. And I think, and I know I'm someone who has been able to and can kind of stop and slow down long enough to listen and to consider the facts and then go, okay, let's talk about where we can go from here. So I'm running for county commissioner more directly because I believe in growing that intersection between the people who are making decisions and the people whose lives are most impacted by those decisions. I have some experience doing this as a macro practice social worker with experience in policy advocacy, and I would be committed to doing that if I were elected to the county board. So as a mom and a seasoned social worker and a Humphrey Policy Fellow alumna, and as an involved citizen, I care deeply about working together to create a healthier and more equitable community. I think I'm going to stop there. That felt a little long.
That's okay. Thank you. But that kind of rolls into the next question. How would you get to know your constituents across the county in order to serve their needs? And in particular, how would you serve minority populations?
While it might sound like a sort of like cliche, politically driven response, I really think that the way I would answer this question would be that I would get to know District 1 constituents one conversation at a time, one community question at a time, or concern at a time, or event at a time. I recently, I walked before the 4th of July parade, and then I spent some time in the park afterward. And I had the opportunity to talk with hundreds of people who live in our county. And it really only reinforced my dedication to thinking about this work and to truly working to understand the things that matter most to Nicollet County residents. Every person I spoke with had, no two people said the same thing. Every person I spoke with had an idea or a question or a concern that I hadn't heard anyone else talk about. And I guess the simplest way to say this is that I can and would be committed to and would take the spirit of those needs and priorities into the boardroom. The second part of your question, so how would I intend to serve minority populations? I would serve minoritized populations by invitation, by inviting them to the table. I think that while metaphorically, I guess, we've redlined people and then very literally redlined people out of certain communities in the state and in many states. But I think we've also sort of redlined people from participating fully in the community. So I think for me, I wouldn't wait for someone to bring forward a concern about equity or discrimination. I would work to intentionally and actively share power and social capital with populations who haven't historically had access or have been included. It's a lot of words to just kind of simply say that communities that feel like they don't belong or that feel like outsiders simply need an invitation. And I'm not afraid to intentionally offer that invitation and extend that invitation. I guess, can I say a few more things about that? Or, okay. One example I can think of would be maybe considering accessibility when we talk about, looking for constituent feedback or, having an open hearing for public comment. I know the city of Mankato has done some kind of innovative things to increase accessibility. So, as someone who has a work schedule that would allow for me on most days to move, parts of my day around so that I could present for public comment. I know that I am in the minority, and that for many working families who have really important things to share with county leadership, it's not an option to be able to do that. So what the city of Mankato has done is they've made this concerted effort to collect community input by hosting forums at different times of the day, like in the morning, over the lunch hour, via Zoom, using an online kind of written forum instead of video to support constituents who may want to comment, who don't have high-speed internet, and video can be hard. So making ourselves accessible, I think, is just one of many examples of one of the ways that we could engage with all communities and populations that we represent.
Great, thanks. So given that county commissioners authorize personnel rules that affect county employee recruitment, classification, compensation, and termination, what policies would you support to increase the diversity of county personnel?
Mm-hmm. I want to preface this by saying that I am very aware that it is not the role of a county commissioner to sort of micromanage the work of county administration and management and supervisors who are doing that. So while I hold that to be very true, I do think there are ways to diversify county personnel. I think when we think about diversity, we often think about things like race and gender, which we've heard talked about, earlier today with the sheriff's forum. And while these are certainly critical to diversification of a workforce, diversity is much broader than this sort of dichotomous way that we often default to thinking about categorical diversity. So cultural identity for me includes, socioeconomic status, does include gender, sex, race, sexual orientation, indigenous heritage, disability, whether developmental or acquired, age, religion, national origin. And if we take just one of those, socioeconomic status, and its role in how we are socialized to the workforce, we might decide to prioritize targeted recruitment. We can do this in local high schools, encouraging students of all backgrounds, or targeting the recruitment of students who may not see representation of themselves in some of the roles in county government, and yet encourage those students to consider the opportunities for employment that exist right here. We can look to our neighbors to the southeast, in Waseca County. I think this is the first summer that they have launched an internship program where they have actively engaged with high school students who are graduating, and they've created an internship in the county system where seniors who graduate apply and are enrolled in this internship program. They go away to their first year of college, wherever that might be, and they come back for the summer and they are interns in county government. While this might sound like just another internship program, it is not. There are very well-established things that we know about how to build rural workforce, and we think about this in social work all the time. And what we know is probably the single most effective way to build a rural workforce and to retain local talent is to target recruitment to people who grew up in rural communities. They are the young people who are statistically most likely to choose to live and work in rural communities like Nicollet County or Waseca County. So I think this is one example. And then I don't think we get to stop at recruitment. I think we need to consider and think carefully about retention. There are thoughtful and intentional ways to do this. So one of the things I think about is, writing job descriptions in a way that could include a pathway to certification or licensure. So thinking about kind of the opportunity gap in education and being proactive about, where are we creating bridges for retention in the workforce in the county. And, once we've successfully recruited and hired a more diverse workforce, which I think obviously takes some time and dedication to strategically doing that, we have to dedicate ourselves to doing tangible things to retain those staff. So we know this is a struggle in every industry in Greater Minnesota and across the country in rural communities. And I think because we know it's an issue, again, we don't wait for a concern or a work climate environment issue to surface, but rather we ask our employees, we can do climate surveys and we can work to be responsive to the unique experiences of diverse members of the county workforce. If we don't ask the question, we won't understand the experiences of diverse persons in the workforce. And if we don't ask the question and we're not willing to maybe we wouldn't if we weren't quite sure what to do with it. But I think we need to be asking the question. I know in some of the larger counties, and I don't know what this would look like in a county like ours, but they, in the last few years, have actually just eliminated the bottom rung of entry-level positions in terms of pay scale. So they didn't start at the top with the highest paid employees very intentionally, and instead they began at the bottom, and they've worked to invest in entry-level positions and living wages. Something else that comes to mind is continuing to support the work and growing the team of community health workers in public health and community liaisons. I think employees with membership in diverse communities can inform our processes, from the way that we write literature that we give to people in the county to, signage to, the way we engage in community. And I think if we want, I would say the very real marketplace issues that we know are happening in the workforce, no matter the sector, that they're touching every sector. And I think we will need to balance the desire to provide high quality services with retention. And we'll have to balance, providing those high quality, equitable services with the way we know taxes burden families and farmers. So if we want high quality services in our county, we have to look at salary and benefits for employees. I know that we know people want to live in our county, and we want people to work here too. So those are just a couple of ideas that I have.
Thanks. That was super helpful. Could you talk a little bit about your priorities for infrastructure, like broadband, roads, and bridges, and how you go about funding them? And we can keep this fairly brief. I do want to leave time for attendees to ask any questions that they might have.
Okay. Maybe I'll talk about my priorities, and then I'll just talk about funding for a couple of them. So I would say priorities would be mental health services and infrastructure, countywide transportation infrastructure, the things we always think about. So roads, bridges, water mitigation, and then equity related issues, which I already spent some time talking about. And an example of this would be, something like broadband and the disparities that in its absence were highlighted in the pandemic. So let me think about how would you go about funding them? So starting with mental health services and infrastructure, I know that the Minnesota Association of Counties has prioritized this across the state, across all 87 counties, for reasons that I am sure we are all pretty aware of. If we were in a room together and I said, raise your hand if you know someone who, struggled with mental health issues or substance use issues, or social isolation during the pandemic, I think probably every single hand would be in the air. I know that, we've I think actually if that there has been this shift for many from a place of, mental health related things that happens like in other spaces too, like it's happening everywhere. As we've kind of shined a light on it here with the impact of COVID-19. Some of the proposed innovations relate to actually reinvesting a tax that counties pay called the does not meet medical criteria tax. And each county pays that tax to the state. And one of the proposals involves asking those tax dollars to be funneled back to the counties to build and grow mental health infrastructure. So if there's anyone on this call who works in the mental health industry, you know that very well that your world is overloaded and those systems are overburdened and the people providing the care are burning out. So this is one example of funding. Let's see, what's another? I guess, do you want me to, can I talk about broadband or do you want me to stop talking?
Like 1 minute.
Okay. Let's see. I guess what I would say is that if we don't prioritize broadband, we know that it's families living in poverty who will suffer, and that there is a massive amount of money. I think the Federal Communications Department Commission designated like $9.2 billion, and Minnesota got $403 million of those dollars. And we followed 3 other states. So we got more money than almost any other state in the United States. And the money exists. There are, mechanisms and dollars to make this happen. And I guess what I would say is I would be committed to working with our elected officials at the state level, at the federal level, to advocate for Nicollet County constituents so that we can really do the work and the legwork it takes to get those dollars into our local communities.
Thank you. Any questions that folks want to drop in the chat for Jennifer to answer? Sometimes people are a little bit shy getting going. So in the meantime, one of the questions we've been asking everybody is, as a candidate, how would you try to bridge our current polarized climate and work toward a more equitable, just, and inclusive community? You've kind of talked a bit about this in your previous responses, but just anything specific that you haven't mentioned yet.
I think I have talked a little bit about that. I think I would say I would work to bridge this very polarized climate by not sidestepping the conversations about, or the difficult conversations that are happening. We heard a number of the sheriff's candidates today talking about kind of setting the tone at the top. And I think, the county board has a real responsibility to engage in those conversations and set the tone for expectations, I guess, and around how we engage in those conversations. Yeah, I can say more, but I feel like I should create some space for.
Sure. Any questions? Sorry, children. I don't know if you can hear that. What would opponents say? And this is another question we've just been asking everybody. What would opponents say about you and how would you respond?
I imagine that my opponent might state that I lack experience in county governance as an elected official, and she would not be wrong. I think what is also true about me, however, is that my lived experience, both personally and professionally, has prepared me to do this work, the work of a county commissioner, and that I'm not someone who stops there. I'm a person who would go through the motions of ensuring that state and federal dollars are approved for use for those critically sort of statutorily legislated required services that every single county has to provide. But I would also do the proactive work required to offset, the economic burden on counties as we think about providing high quality services and remaining competitive. Yeah. Can I say more, or where are we time wise?
This is towards the end of our time, but if you
Okay.
have just a minute to wrap up.
Yeah. I guess wrapping up the sort of how I just responded to that question, I would say that there are these very important and sometimes pro forma things that the board does. And I'm not afraid of the other side of the work, which is really engaging with city officials and constituents and state elected officials, advocacy organizations like the Association for Minnesota Counties, and looking at how we can leverage taxes that we've paid to the state to offset the burden of the economic burden to the county. So the alternative is that we sort of look at that and say, well, you've taxed us and you can keep it. And so I think there are windows of opportunity that we could explore to get those tax dollars back, those state collected tax dollars back into our communities. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Just really quick, do you have anything that we haven't talked about yet that you just want to throw out there? Like seriously, like 30 seconds.
I think I would just say that it's an honor to be here and to thank you to everyone who's here and listening and participating. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here today and talk to you. Thanks, Siri and Indivisible.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll send out your email in case folks have questions, and we'll be sending all of this information out so people can make an informed decision at the ballot box. Thanks so much for being with us. And we hope everyone who's on the call right now can hang around just so we can do a quick debrief. Thanks.